Okay, welcome everyone to the August meetup of the Thompson-Okanagan Hacking HR chapter. I'm super glad that that you've joined us, and to those who registered but weren't able to come. We hope you're okay, and we hope you've got what you need and that you're taking care of yourself while you're likely taking care of everybody else, because that's what we do when we're in HR. And so we're just so happy to provide this space where HR professionals and also people who are leading people, because you don't need to be an HR professional to be a part of hacking HR, but just care about your people. We love creating this space for people to come and be better and have that safe space to learn how to do better. Dean, my co-host, my partner in crime, you were going to just give a little intro about hacking HR, and then we're going to dive into our special guest.
Yeah, for those of you who aren't familiar with the concept, it's basically something that was started about 3 years ago to provide a space, like Candace has referred to, where professionals can get together, come together as a community, share collaborative ideas, to make the entire business community stronger. Certainly the name suggests that it has a focus on HR, and it certainly does, but all are welcome. So it is a global reach. I believe they're approaching 200 chapters across the world now and growing, and has been very successful in its approach. A couple of really neat things that are core to hacking HR is there's no fees for anybody to participate, anybody to join. And there's no selling. Nobody's ever going to try to sell you things. And those are two things that are very core to the founders' intent and initiative for this entire space. So this is our second session of the Thompson-Okanagan chapter. So welcome to those that have joined. And we do meet on the last Thursday of every month at 8 a.m. Pacific time. So pass the word. It's something that Candace and I are passionate about and trying to grow. And we look forward to everybody's participation today and in the future.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Dean. And welcome to our special guest today, Aaron Telnis. I've had the privilege of starting to work with Aaron on some cool projects, and just realized, like, he has so much wisdom and expertise to bring to this group, especially as, you know, so many of us in the midst of pandemic are looking at how to support remote workers and how to see success happen in distributed teams. Aaron Telnis is an organizational psychologist with Work Evolution, a team of organizational psychologists driven to enhance engagement and performance in remote and distributed workplaces. The individuals on the Work Evolution team are global thought leaders on remote work and help leaders, teams, and individuals achieve remote working success. Through his career, Aaron has sought to improve programs and performance by affecting change at the organizational and individual levels. Aaron's adept at conflict management and resolution. I love that both those words are in there, Aaron, to foster increased understanding, stronger relationships, and clearer objectives. In his work with individuals and organizations, Aaron adopts a creative, collaborative, and solution-focused mindset to achieve desired results. He enjoys supporting individuals, teams, and organizations navigating and optimizing the effectiveness of distributed work and teams. He's a registered psychologist with the College of Alberta Psychologists, member of the Psychologists Association of Alberta, works in the fields of industrial and organizational and clinical counseling psychology with the Leadership Success Group, Calgary Career Counseling, Work Evolution. Do you have time for your own life, Aaron? Yeah, okay, good. Helping organizations and individuals achieve optimal functioning, productivity, and engagement. And there's a host of other things here. And I see actually that you've got you've had some specialties in performance anxiety as well. So that's super interesting. Maybe I should be booking a session for you. I always feel my heart rate increases as we head into leading things. But super privileged to have you today, Aaron. And I know you're talking to us from your office in Calgary. So the format for our time is going to be Dean and I have a few questions that we want to throw out your way. But if any of the others have who are on the call have questions, please pop them into the chat, and we'll keep an eye on that as well. And so Aaron's agreed to be in the hot seat and to let us pick his brain on a bunch of questions. So Aaron, I'm just going to kick the first one off, and Dean and I will kind of tag team. But from the research that Work Evolution has done and the team there, I know that something that's come out really strongly is the importance of relationships between leaders and their teams. What should leaders be aware of or cognizant of in order to be successful in leading in a remote context?
That's a really, really good question, and it hits home on a lot of different fronts for me. As a psychologist, relationships and communication and connecting is paramount, and that's one of the major things I really focus on when communicating with leaders and when working with organizations. And so you're going to hear me hit this kind of button a bunch of times today. In the remote working space, you need to be incredibly intentional, especially since we've been kind of thrust into this remote workspace through the pandemic, right? Many organizations might not be comfortable in that remote space and are going, okay, now I'm not face-to-face with people, I'm not co-located, and how do I maintain healthy relationships? There's no more water cooler, it's gone, right? And so the thing to be very cognizant of is being intentional with when and where to have conversations and connect with people, to remember to have those water cooler conversations and connect with people on personal levels like we do, like the drive-bys past offices, past cubicles, right? That's gone now. So we have to be more clear and more direct in how we connect with our people abroad in a remote space. And so I think that can really, what you can do and what some of the stuff that we suggest is that you create kind of water cooler chats, whether it's in Microsoft Teams or Zoom or any other kind of platform that you're using, Slack. They provide opportunities for people just to have that back and forth that we really miss out on potentially when we go remote. Another thing too, in terms of building relationships, is this idea of communication medium match. So what this is all about, it's about this notion of you and I, we have different, and all of us, we have different preferences on how we want to be communicated with in that remote space, right? And so, for instance, I'm a bit more of an introverted individual. So if you're going to call me all the time, I'm going to probably put you to voicemail more often than not, because getting called off in that second, I'm like, oh, I need time to think and process. So I like emails, whereas other people who have potentially more of that extroverted preference, they're going to seek more of that kind of immediate face-to-face or phone or video conference, right? So it's just being adaptable and adjusting to what each individual preferences are in that remote context. And it's going to take time, and it might change over time too. Does that kind of answer that question for you?
I think that's a great one. So I just have sort of a follow-up question on that. So like, do you have any tips about how to assess that communication medium match? Like you mentioned that you have that awareness. Yeah. So as a leader, like what are some of the ways that they can, assess that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the way you can assess that is really just sitting down and having a communication medium match conversation and a meeting, right? And so what we've done in our organization at Work Evolution, as well as what we promote to the other organizations we work with, is creating almost a medium match or communication medium match charter, right? So Candace, she prefers emails for this situation and phone calls for this situation and video conference and texts, right? And oftentimes it's related to the level of urgency of the situation. And so again, everyone's going to be different, but then you have this kind of go-to chart where you can go, okay, this is how I want to connect with Dean. This is how I want to connect with Candace based on this situation, so that you're really kind of helping maintain good, healthy relationships. Because if someone's going to call me over and over and over again when I'm like, hey, email me, that might put some strain on the relationship in the long run. So it helps people be, again, very intentional and very cognizant of how people prefer to be.
I love how tangible this is, Aaron. And actually related to this, you and I had an experience like just in even preparing for this chapter, meetup. And, I sent the email to you saying, are you interested? And you said, yes, I am. And there was this back and forth email thing that happened. And then I was like, okay, I feel like I just need, because I'm a verbal processor. And I was sensing, I didn't ask you, but I was sensing that like email was your preferred, but I wasn't sure it was going to be the most efficient for me. And so I hit record on a Zoom thing to record myself, just going, okay, this is what hacking HR is. This is what we can expect. These are the kinds of questions. And I did like the stream of consciousness thing, which works for me. And then I sent you the recording so that you could watch it in your own time. And then you replied by email. So, like I'm actually curious, like just how was that kind of a process? Like if you were to extrapolate that, like, you know, I mean, I feel like I really learned something. That was the first time I had done that. I was like, okay, it's looking super hard for us to figure out a time. So I'm just going to do my stream of consciousness thing. But what was that like for you as an introverted, you know, person receiving that video and in that way?
Honestly, I think it was great, because in those moments when we were planning kind of for me to be here and for us to kind of work together, I was like super busy with my clients on the career counseling side. So as an introvert, when I want to engage in something, I want to fully immerse myself in it. So like, that's why emails are great, because it's like when I get a chance, then I can fully immerse in the email, respond fully and completely. Same with that video recording, right? I could sit down, I listened to it. It was like, okay, I can absorb it, versus kind of on the fly when sometimes those phone calls come out of nowhere and it's like, oh, okay, I got 25 other things to do and I have to be on this phone call, but my brain might be elsewhere. And I always want to be kind of present and focused. So that's, for me, that's why that works that way. And so,
okay,
yeah,
cool.
I'm glad it worked. Did it work for you?
Oh, 100%. I was like, oh my gosh, I think this thing I just tried might be like, this might be a new thing. So thanks for the feedback that worked for you as an introvert,
Totally
because that's interesting news. It was a new strategy for me. So cool. Dean, what's our next question?
I mean, just touching on this one, maybe a little bit more. Can you talk to us maybe a little bit in the context of dealing with an individual in the remote setting versus an entire team in the remote setting, where everybody's wants or needs maybe aren't the same, and how you adapt to that?
Sorry, Dean, can you ask that question again? You're looking for kind of comment around how you manage one-to-one.
Well, one-to-one, as well as a team environment where you have multiple people that are remote but all in the same space, and their needs may be different, whether it's the mechanism of communication or their style, and now you have 3 or 4 people with differing needs. How do you adapt to that environment?
So yeah, like I was saying earlier, I think it's really important to create a charter, right? So where you have all those people come together, and so that then they air their desires and their wishes and their preferences out loud, and then you see it kind of form out in front of everybody else, and then you go, oh, because you'll see multiple brains kind of triggers like, it might not work for everybody, and then all of a sudden there's this negotiation that goes on. So yes, in part, it can be really beneficial to sit down one-on-one with people and go, okay, hey, so between you and I, what's our communication style going to be? What methods are we going to use? But then it's also really, really important to expand out to that team, because we all fit into a team one way or another. And so it's knowing how those linkages, those lines, like that spider web, connects to everybody. And again, inviting that negotiation and really making it a team, a group effort, because ultimately we do that in real time in co-location. We just have to do the same in remote work, right? And we have to create those environments and those contexts to have those negotiations, have those conversations, and just be really open and honest. Because if we're muted, right, and that's something I learned, is I need to say, it's like, don't text me outside of the workday. I'm not going to respond. I'm a boundary keeper in that sense, whereas some people are integrators, right? So they're going to be working from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. They're going to take breaks throughout, right? People know that it's like, okay, Aaron's window is this time. Other than that, you're going to have to put it to email, or you text them if someone's hair is on fire, basically. And so it's really just, starting, you can start individually, but then also allowing for that negotiation and that group kind of creation.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great.
You talk about setting the boundaries, which I totally get and appreciate. What are some of your suggestions or experiences around people that deal with multiple time zones, so that the operational day isn't from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. in the time zone that they're in, it's from 8 a.m. till 10 p.m.
Yeah, and so I think again, it's being very intentional with your communication, right? Because if you're dealing with someone and I don't know what the potential time difference is there a time difference between you and the South California there?
No, me in Montreal there is.
More of Montreal, yeah. And so in those situations where there might be a hair on fire kind of moment, it's important to let people know that your timing in terms of responding, right, is like it's going to be close to immediate or within 20 minutes or a half hour or an hour when you're kind of in your typical business hours, but that might likely change when there's overlap or when there's that time zone shift. I know, for instance, one of the teams or one of the organizations I recently was working with is out in Poland. So they're basically a whole workday ahead of us. And so getting to work with them, and they're seeing my emails at our time, 1 a.m., right? So it's like that back and forth is really limited. There's a really short window where both people are able to communicate and we're both able to be live, but it's knowing that it's being overt and being really, really transparent about when you're working, when you're available, and what those ranges of availability and access are.
So, Candace, I know this is jumping ahead a bit in our agenda, but I'll segue into a question that just touches nicely on that as it relates to cultures. And I mean, we've touched on the time zone component, but can you talk to us a little bit about cultural sensitivity? And Poland to Canada is probably a great example in terms of some things to be aware of and cognizant that, aren't necessarily attached to time, but are attached to things that may be important to those individuals in that setting.
Totally. So one of the major things with culture to be aware of is initially the language, right? And so we were debriefing one of our products they called the Distributed Leader Profiler, and there was a term in there, industriousness. They don't have that in Polish. And so that was something that's like, oh, that's really good for us to know. So it's like, okay, now we have to frame that in a way so that the content and the information in that assessment is still communicated effectively without using that word. And so it's being aware that there's going to be differences. And similarly, they talk about having a very homogenous kind of group, right? A very homogenous organization. So there's not a lot of cultural diversity there. So when we assessed that, it was like, okay, great. Yeah, we are culturally sensitive, right? However, internally, not so much diversity, right? But it's then in that case being aware that that can happen at any point. And so speaking further to this idea of culture, the best way I can describe it is think and act slow, right? Take your time when you're interacting with people who might have layers of identity, layers of culture that you might not fully be aware of or fully know how to navigate, and be open and humble in that sense. Ask, hey, am I coming across in an inappropriate or insensitive way? And please ask for that feedback, right? Be open to learn. And that can really, it creates a good, healthy dynamic in that communication, because then those individuals are not scared or concerned about sharing, okay, yeah, this is my preference, this is not my preference. And that communication, that stream of communication becomes much more fluid, right? There's not as many barriers or blockages. Yeah.
Awesome. Should I jump in here, Dean?
Absolutely.
Okay. So there's no doubt, and you've already mentioned it, Aaron, that remote leaders really need to be flexible and adaptable in order to be successful. So do you have any tips about like super tangibly what this could look like on a day-to-day or a week-to-week? And so sort of the second part of that is, what are some things that leaders should be watching for within their team, like as they're figuring out how to be flexible and adaptable? What are the risks in a team?
Yeah, so the risks in remote work is that we're still potentially holding people to that traditional 8 to 5, butt in the chair kind of work culture and work style, where that's not necessarily what it is anymore, or what it might even go back to when all this stuff blows over. And just generally in the remote workspace is it's understanding that people are potentially at home now. So there's demands like a puppy in the house, kids, right? Anything, laundry, dishes, those things are all accessible now. And so people have to, they don't have that clear separation where it's like, okay, I'm at work, in the office, right? Everything else is away and I have to leave, right? So it's being aware that there's going to be things that people are going to be emergent, that people need to address and be comfortable with. So as leaders, I think it's really, really important to recognize that remote work isn't always pretty, but it can be really, really effective, and really, it can create a high level of productivity to allow people to operate in kind of a flexible way. And so one of the things, and I'm sure Candace, you're far more you see this far more than even I do, is this idea that the traditional working hours shift in remote work, right? Where instead of saying you need to be online from 8 to 5, 7 to 3, 9 to whatever it is, it's, okay, we need you at least present between 10 and 2 for meetings or whatever else it might be, where we have to come together as teams, or we need kind of immediate kind of feedback. But other than that, if it works better for you and you want to start at 10 or start at 6 and work till 2, do that, right? Create that schedule flexibility as well, right? And so one of the other things you asked about is kind of what are some additional like tangible things people can do to kind of practice that flexibility. Because again, I'm gonna go back to it, is have those conversations, see what does remote work look like for your individuals within your team, right? Where is going to be where and when are they going to be most effective, right? And so it's being very overt and saying, hey, I need to know when you work best, right? And to speak to that a bit more, it's this idea that we all have, and this is coming from my registered psychology work as a sleep counselor at times, is this idea that we all have different sleep cycles and sleep styles. So some of us are the early birds, right? Easy to get to work at 7, 8 a.m., right? Others might be the night owls. So it's like they're scraping themselves out of bed to get to work at that 7 or 8, but yet they're way more effective if they're able to start at 10. Let them, right? If your organization has that ability to do that, let them, because it might very well lead to a greater degree of productivity and also like satisfaction in their work. So yeah, any other follow-up questions around that, Candace?
It's so helpful, Aaron. And what occurs to me, I'm reflecting on a conversation I had with a leader just this week, actually, who was saying that he was getting feedback from his team about the fact that he was sending emails at 10 at night, and saying, and they were like, what the heck? Like, like, and they felt this implicit pressure to be replying or working as much or at the same times as their boss. And so he said, like having the conversation to say, I'm working when it works best for me, but that's not the expectation for you, because we're all in this, kind of environment. And so, one of the strategies that he employed was to, first of all, just, have that conversation to say, just because I send you an email at 10, I'm just getting it out of my head. Like, and it's, the kids are in bed, like, that's when I'm able to do it. There is no expectation that you reply to it until you're in the next day. If I know where to find you if there's something urgent, but please do not feel the pressure to be checking your email just because I'm working. But what I appreciated the most about what the leader was saying was the just the recognition that even though he'd said that to the team, that there still might be this implicit pressure because they want to perform, they want to advance in the company, they want to do all this kind of stuff. And so he was starting to play with like the and I've never used it before, but he was saying like the delay send function in Outlook. And so he was writing it either, but then it was going to send at a time that didn't, like, add this like nonverbal pressure to his team.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
I think that's really, really important, and something that I want to highlight is there is this absolute culture that we've all grown up in the world of work, where it's when your boss works, you work, right? Keep up, right? And be available, right? And so there's sometimes we struggle to create healthy boundaries with work, right? There's people who work incredible amounts of overtime, might not get paid for it. It's like, I talk to clients about that all the time. I'm like, hey, you're not worth $0, right? So it's very much important to through this remote work, we have an opportunity to break down that culture and improve it, right? Where it's like you described in that example, your leader's like, no, like, I'm doing it for me. Like, it's going to work for me. It's what I need to do, but you don't have to do that. And then, yeah, integrating at the latest end, right? They are absolutely breaking down that barrier and that kind of old way of working, right? And I think there's a huge opportunity here in remote work, in a remote workspace, and even through the pandemic, where everyone's kind of been thrust into the remote workspace, to really kind of create this new culture, this new idea around work, and to really, and you can shape it to the individual organizations. And so there's huge opportunity here.
So I just want to encourage everybody, like, if you have any questions or comments, like, please pop them into the chat, and we'll absolutely integrate those. I mean, I think, as you know, Erin, this is a group of either HR professionals or people who are in, people ops of some kind. And so for us, like, sometimes we have people reporting into us, but often we're the ones coming alongside of the leaders, trying to support them in doing these strategies. And so, I mean, I think these are the kinds of things that as HR leaders, we can be supporting our business leaders in doing. Dean, do you want to add anything there?
Yeah, no, and I really appreciate what Erin's touching on there. And I think so much of it is just recognition, and not a realization of some of the practices that people are employing. And I know I had an experience recently where our HR manager in Montreal, of course, again, the 3-hour time difference, and I'm one of those early morning guys where I'm most productive from like 5 a.m. till 7:30, and then I start dropping off. So for me, it's great because I can interact with her. But the realization is her day really doesn't end until the West Coast shuts down. And from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. for her is her most productive time because the West Coast leaves her alone. And I was seeing it as an opportunity for me when in actual fact, it was having a negative impact on her. And just that realization and not, even her saying, can you please leave me alone? But it's something that, was a light bulb moment for me to say, hey, unless it's absolutely urgent, it can wait until 8 a.m.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah. So maybe can you talk to us a little bit, Erin, about supporting productivity and remotely, and the leaders' role in that, and some of the ways that leaders can do that, especially for people that may be working in a new remote environment for them due to the recent circumstances of the pandemic.
Totally. Yeah. I really like this question because this is the one, right? It's like everyone's working from home. No one's going to be productive. Everyone's going to be distracted. It's like, I don't know. There's like such a fantastic opportunity for people to be incredibly productive in this space. One of the things that I've been realizing through my organizational work as well as my personal and career counseling work is this idea that for a lot of people who've been thrust into this remote space without kind of any prep time or any consideration and any real fit discussion, is this idea that the commute time has disappeared. And we actually, like in conversations, I realized how important that is for people, because it allows people to transition their brain from life to work, right? And so for a lot of people who were thrust into this remote space, who were really used to being co-located and working with people and having that commute time, they're now just sitting They're getting up, rolling out of bed, showered, everything's ready, and then they sit in front of the computer all day long. And there's no commute time. And as weird as that sounds, that's really, really important, I think. Like to allow people to go, okay, now I'm ready to work, right? I listen to my music, I kind of plan my day before I even get to the office kind of thing. That's gone. And so what I've invited and challenged people to do to kind of boost that productivity, because it helps for that transition time, is to go for a commute walk, go for a commute bike ride, go around the block, exit the house like you're literally going to work, do a loop, come back, do what you need to do what you do when you're on transit, whatever it is, listen to your audiobook, whatever it is, have some commute time. And then do that at the end of the day too. Don't just get out of your chair and then go sit on your couch or go make dinner. It's like, have that wind down moment, whether it's 10, 15, 20 minutes, 40 minutes even. Have that transition period. Absolutely. And another thing too, to speak to kind of similarly with this idea of commute time, is self-care. And I'm gonna stand on this soapbox as a psychologist and say self-care is so incredibly important in a remote workspace, in the sense that people are not just getting up, rolling out of bed and starting work, right? Like, get up, do your routine, have some time for yourself in the morning, have some time for yourself at night, right? Try not, wherever you can, if you're a boundary keeper like myself, right? Work within your window. When your window's over, separate. Have a separate workspace. Again, I feel like I can go on forever about all these different things you can potentially do. I had a client who had her office in her kitchen, her remote office in her kitchen. And so there's no division. There's no separation there, right? So if you have, even if you have just a nook or a cranny that you can work in, and then close your laptop, whatever, and have it almost be out of sight, however you can, do that, right? If you have offices at home, great, use them. And a final point to speak to is this idea of boundary keeping integrator. I've kind of already spoken to this bit, but it's this idea that if you're someone who likes to work within a certain window and you don't want kind of any interaction outside of that, communicate that. Be very clear. And if you're an integrator who likes to work for an hour or two, do some laundry, eat, whatever it is, do some more work, play with the kids, do that, and you work from like 8 to 8. Totally fine. But communicate it, right? Communicate to your leaders to their teams, right? Make it overt, make it obvious. And that's just it. In remote workspace, we lose nonverbal communication. And sometimes that information is so important to us, and it helps us recognize, like, oh, I'm intruding, right? If you were working with your colleague out east there in Montreal, face to face, you might pick up like, oh, this is their go time. I feel like I'm intruding. I feel like I'm stepping on some toes. But when we're apart, it's not as overt, not as clear. So it's communicating because you're trying, like you're trying to make up for that lack of nonverbal, right? Because at the end of the day, nonverbal is 90% of our communication.
You bring up okay, first of all, this boundary keeper versus integrator stuff, this is is anybody else just going, oh my gosh, this is the language I needed for, Dean, you're nodding, thank goodness, so I'm not alone. So, I mean, I was just introduced to this, as Erin, as we've been working on this other project, and I'm like, this is the language I've been missing. This is because we know the boundary keepers and we know the integrators, but within a team to have that conversation, and I feel like that's the kind of nugget for us as HR professionals or people ops, folks or consultants, whatever your work world looks like, but for us to equip and to facilitate conversations about that, I think can really facilitate a lot of empathy and a lot of support and understanding. So I feel like that's a gift that you've just given me anyway. So thank you for that integrator versus boundary keeper stuff. And you bring up the importance of nonverbal communication, and so for leaders who maybe aren't the strongest in the strongest communicators, that many of us are in positions of supporting. So they're not great writers, and they're not great verbal communicators. They really have historically relied on the nonverbal, like, you know, shots in the arm going way to go, or thumbs ups, or, you know, like, and just sort of the working shoulder to shoulder. They've really relied on that way of working. How can we as HR leaders, how can we encourage or equip those leaders to increase their communication?
Yeah, great question. And I think it comes down to having a brainstorming conversation and going, okay, so here are the barriers that we have. That style that you used to work with, it's just not, it doesn't work anymore because we're in this digital space. And so let's help you create an identity in this digital space that will allow you to really leverage your leadership skills and abilities and talents in this space, right? And again, it can be one of those things where it's let's figure out what works and what doesn't, and then asking for, again, it's always these opportunities for asking for feedback from your team, right? And refining their approach to leadership, right? Because maybe for some people that shot in the arm style, that kind of shoulder to shoulder, that was like, it's too much. I feel like I'm being, it's overbearing, right? And so it's an opportunity for them to reshape and hone their talents. But yeah, I think it's not to say that, oh, they're lost cause. It's going, this is an opportunity and this is a chance. Like, let's see what could work for you. Is it just the thumbs up emoji, right? Like, and also just calling it out, being like, hey guys, like I really struggle, or it's really a challenge for me to communicate in this way, to lead this way. Let me know how best I can support you in this, what works for you and what doesn't. It might feel a little like rough at times, but just being a bit self-deprecating if you can, right? Honoring that it's challenging working in this space and in distributed teams. It's challenging managing these teams because we're social creatures. This is a very unique way to socialize. Our brains are not wired this way. So again, through my perspective, it's an honest conversation, and it's no detriment to people, I think, long term, to just be honest and go, hey, I'm just trying to figure this out and how to best support everybody here. And so, yeah, having that conversation with those leaders as HR professionals, but then also those leaders having those conversations with their team so that, again, they can best support their team with their own talents. Does that answer your question, Candace?
It sure does. So,
okay,
Dean,
good.
Do you have another follow-up question loaded up? Because I do, but I want to make sure.
Right ahead, Candace.
Yeah. Okay. So, so you actually mentioned, I can't remember the exact words that you used, Erin, but it reminded me of just. It reminded me of cognitive load. And so this is also a newish concept to me, especially in light of, in light of remote work. And so I wondered if, just as a psychologist, if you could explain what is cognitive load and what are some of the unique risks around cognitive load in a remote working environment?
Okay, this is a really cool question. So Candace, if I go off on a tangent, really.
Well, don't get the hook out.
I love this. I love this question. I love this stuff. So to put it very briefly, our brain is a stimulus processing machine. It is meant to process all that's around us, right? Through our five senses and other factors. And so cognitive load is basically the amount of bandwidth, the amount of range that you have to commit to any given situation. And so cognitive load, we can get overloaded quite quickly and quite readily, oftentimes in the remote space, because we have all this stimulus coming in. We have video here, and then we have email here, and then we have phone calls here, and then our kids are coming in the back, and their dog is needing something, right? So it's like it creates a situation where we can reach a point of cognitive overload, right? And so it's becoming really, really aware of what our individual preferences are and what our individual range is. And so the way I describe this to my clients, or I ask them about it, is how much bandwidth do you have? And I do it on a percentage basis, right? It's like, okay, through your work right now, how much bandwidth, where's your bandwidth at? And they're like 100% or 110. And usually it's over 100% when they're like, I'm burning out, right? That's the same as cognitive load, right? When we're constantly engrossed in stimulus that we're processing, it gets to a point where it's just like too much. Our brain goes, okay, there needs to be a break. There needs to be a recharge moment and a step away from all that to process, right? Because it has to almost catch up, right? Sometimes it gets behind. And so yeah, it's managing that by being very aware of what our individual preferences are and slowly introducing new levels or new types of cognitive load elements or stimulus, right? And so does that kind of answer your question?
It absolutely does as a definition. And so, and because I definitely have noticed, like, oh my gosh, I just want these earbuds out, like of my, like, and yeah, so I've and it's like, I mean, I used to be able to sit through meetings all day, like, no problem. And now I'm like, can we just have a phone call? Cause my eyes are tired, like from the screen and so just the different sensory, kinds of pieces. But I wonder if you have just, and I think this is really about putting the oxygen mask on the people in this call right now. What's some advice for us to assess, like, just how to increase, like, or improve that bandwidth, or what are some of the most common ways that we can just like tackle this cognitive load thing?
Yeah, so and this is something I suggest to all my clients is breaks. Take breaks. Like you said, like just like, I want to get these earbuds out. I want to not potentially be on a video call or have these hundreds of emails coming at me. Our brain is not wired to process this type of information as readily as social information, right? Even as an introvert, right? My brain is wired, right, to sit with people. I can sit with people for 8 hours a day, no energy drain, fine, 100%, right? But you put me in front of a computer for a day, right? Even as nice as that is to interact in that way, I'm burnt, right? Because again, I'm stretching and using muscles that our brain and our body hasn't conditioned, like, and isn't like primitively wired to manage, right? And so ask me your question again, because I want to make sure I hit it. So it's that idea.
So just super concrete tips about how to deal with this, because this is our new work for many of us. Like it's computers all day long. So taking breaks is a great strategy.
Yeah.
Any other tips that you have, even to just be aware?
So it's taking breaks and finding those decompression moments, right? Oftentimes our body is able to process cognitive load and stress, which cognitive load is, in a physical way. So if you can go for walks, right? Eat, right? Replenish the body, take the earbuds out, sit and meditate for a while. One of the things I always like to suggest, which is, it can be a bit unconventional, but it can be really beneficial, is float therapy or sensory deprivation techniques, where you go and you lay in these baths that you float effortlessly in, and it allows your brain to just kind of fully unload, right, and offload, so that you can really so potentially suggesting that to your leaders and their leaders to the team is like taking opportunities to meditate, to do flow therapy or do sensory deprivation, right, just to allow your brain to reorganize itself. And sleep is so incredibly important. I cannot stress it enough. Get your full sleep. And 8 hours is not the magic number. Sleep until you're rested, basically. And so for some people, that's 5 hours. Some people, that's 10. But at the end of the day, it's really be conscious of taking care of your physical body. And that can really help with managing cognitive load. So yeah, if it's chasing people out of their desks, even if they're at home, right, saying like, okay, there are no meetings for the next hour. I expect everyone to go for a walk, go eat, and report back. And that can be kind of that water cooler talk. What did you have for lunch? Where did you go and walk? What did you see? Right? It's taking those moments to be mindful, right? And so as I'm saying this, another strategy comes to mind is this activity called 5 senses. And so what it is you systematically go through your 5 senses. So you say, for instance, you try and see 5 things, and then you want to hear 4 things, smell 3 things, touch 2 things, right? And the list kind of goes on all the way down to 1. And that can really help you kind of come out of here, which is kind of overloaded, and focus it on your external environment, which our brain is wired for. At the very end of the day, we can do this work, but it's a bit more challenging than some of that engaging with nature, engaging with people stuff directly. So it's being conscious of that and helping develop that skill over time versus kind of crash coursing yourself and sitting in front of the computer for 8 hours or 10 hours and going, oh, why am I totally bagged? It's like, well, because we're not totally conditioned or developed in that way. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Hopefully that
sure, it sure does. Yeah, Dean, others, hop in here.
I guess one other one, and kind of shifting gears a little bit, is can you maybe talk to us a little bit about the differences in leading teams that are distributed or remote versus those that are traditional and the face-to-face type of team that is not distributed or remote, and some of the differences and some of the successes in both?
Yeah, so I think some of the major differences that I've seen and I've heard about is that, again, it's that loss of easy communication, right? Where, and again, it's part of this cognitive load discussion, where it's like, okay, now as remote teams, right, we have to be really, really cognizant and really, really kind of overt. The word I'm looking for is intentional, right, in our communication. So communication becomes paramount in remote teams, where it's almost taken for granted in our co-located and kind of traditional work environments. One of the successes I think I've really seen is in terms of remote work is that it provides people with a lot of flexibility that they might not have realized they enjoyed. Whereas similarly, I've talked to individuals who are in that remote space now, and the co-located, your traditional kind of work environment, it provides a lot of structure that people really, really thrive on. And because at the core, yes, humans, we love routine, because routine links to a sense of safety and security. And for better or worse, that office space, that co-located workspace is a sense of security, comfort, and control, right? And so I think there's successes and struggles on both sides, but yes, both have their benefits. And again, in remote, it allows people to try different ways of being productive and potentially realize like, hey, I'm actually more productive when I can be at home, because they might not have an office door to close when they're at the office, right? And so they need that quiet space, and they can create that quiet space more effectively in remote settings. And on the other side is those individuals who are highly kind of collaborative and social, right? Needing that buzz around them, needing that energy to work and be effective, right? And they can find that through co-located work. And so at the end of the day, I think one of the things that is coming out of this kind of the advent of remote work and it becoming more and more common is that personality fit. Are you more of a personality fit towards remote work or co-located work, and why? Right? Is it, wanting that social interaction, needing that structure? Is it wanting that quiet time, that space, and that solitude, right? And really kind of assessing what works best for you. And so some people really benefit from that blend as well, because they need that time. It's like, okay, I need my 2 or 3 days just to be holed up at home or on a beach in Thailand, wherever it is, but basically being able to work, and then have those 2 days in the office because they can get their social time in, they can get the meetings in, be most effective in those settings as well. That more blended approach. Does that answer your question, Dean?
Yes, absolutely.
Please let me know.
So we have a question in the chat from Megan.
Awesome.
And she says, sorry for the novel here, don't apologize.
Don't apologize. I
So
write novels all the time.
yeah, especially in HR, many of the conversations that led to us keeping informed, getting a pulse check, et cetera, would start organically in the halls, as you touched on earlier. So often the helpful nuggets that we would get out of these water cooler conversations are on ideas and issues employees typically wouldn't formally reach out to HR about. So we would hear in passing that a specific team might be feeling drained this month, but those employees wouldn't typically see that as something to reach out to HR and share that. So how would you recommend that HR teams create some of that natural, approachable environment virtually?
So the first thing that came to mind as soon as you said pulse check is like have a channel, have a HR pulse check channel where it can be anonymous, confidential. They can communicate directly to an HR representative, right? Another thing, I think my brain just blanked on me, but it will come back. This idea that okay, let me come back to that. I can't, if I try to stare the answer in the mouth, it won't come back to me.
Yeah.
So, okay, so let me read the question. It'll fire me up here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So the conversations of HR relies, and I've been on, like you rely on sort of walking by to get, to get the feel or to kind of overhear, or it's by the water cooler that that you get the sense that something's going on. And so in particular for HR leaders who aren't necessarily embedded in the teams, how can we find those organic opportunities like without having those water cooler opportunities? So, and yeah, Megan, it's such a good point, because I mean, often people don't reach out to HR until it's really until it's so hard. They've already sucked it up. They've already, pulled up their bootstraps. They've already, sort of tried, and then it's been finally like, oh, and then they reach out, to HR and say help. And so what we rely on is HR, like often I've sure been there, is just those, is sort of the like feeling like, and being around enough to get the vibe of things. And so, so the question is how, do you have any tips for recreating some of those natural and approachable places virtually?
So Candace, thank you for that, because in that space, this is the introverted brain I have.
It's all good. Yeah, of course.
So at the end of the day, I would frame this as do team building, because I think down to is that as HR in the co-located space, there doesn't necessarily need to be as much trust, because it's just out there. It floats out by the water cooler, right? So again, this is probably going to drive everyone crazy when I say this. It's being intentional in doing team building, remote team building activities, whether it's cocktail hour or a game show afternoon or whatever it is. Doing something to allow people to be around their colleagues and their coworkers in a non-work format, right?
Yeah.
And so it can really help with building that trust, where then they feel more comfortable coming to you before it's a crisis, before it's like DEFCON 1, right? And so it's doing those things again that it's where you can take advantage of those kind of co-located spaces. It's now creating opportunities and sidebar and discussion in more kind of created spaces. So, and I think that's one of the biggest things is in our traditional office spaces, our co-located locations, we have these places, the water coolers, right? The hallways, right? These situations where people are in transit or change and therefore it's open forum. It's not they're at their desk, they're in their kind of work brain. So it's creating those environments intentionally in the remote space. So whether that's a team building hour, cocktail hour, just a debrief.
Yeah, Yeah, it's
Yeah.
that's super good, Erin, and it's definitely sparked for me, like just that. I mean, yeah, we've been talking to, or I've been talking to leaders that I support about the importance of them doing it. But you know, to Megan's question, how am I creating that space so that people can have that by the way conversation with me? And so this has been absolutely awesome. We are at the end of our time, and we've got people who need to hop onto other things. Which thanks for showing up, and thanks so much for joining us. Any final questions that anybody has in this that they want to ask Erin? Sort of last call here. Erin, if the leaders on this call could hear one thing, what is it? What's your parting words?
Communicate like never before.
Good one.
Yeah.
Dean, any final comments from you?
Well, thanks so much, Erin. It's been really insightful and really appreciate it. And a lot of things have certainly hit home for me. So thank you very much.
Awesome.
Okay, Erin, on behalf of all of us who've been sitting here listening, and the people who will be receiving a copy of this recording, thank you so much for your time. And you had already expressed ahead of time that you would absolutely welcome people reaching out to you directly to learn more about your practice or some of the other concepts that you've covered in this time. And I know you have just huge passion and so much more that you could share. But for this hour, we're absolutely grateful for you bringing your wisdom and expertise. So on behalf of Hacking HR Thompson-Okanagan chapter, thank you so much.